Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. Sorry this is coming a little later on Friday, but I've been working on a video that should be out to all of you tomorrow that I'm pretty excited about. I think the video itself is cool, and I also am really enjoying the new lens I got, thanks to the recommendation from Mark from My Life in Gaming. And I think this is going to be kind of upgrade the way I shoot some CRT stuff in the future. So as always, any feedback, any suggestions at all of not getting the moire pattern when you shoot CRTs, I'm all ears, because I think the combination of my camera and lenses might not be the best for doing this, because I've tried everything that you could possibly imagine, and the only thing that works is going out of focus, but then it's all blurry. So what's the point of taking a video of a high-end CRT? So any camera nuts, please feel free to comment and add any suggestions. But enough of me rambling about my own crap. Let's jump into the Q&As. I'll start with the newest post today, because why not? Bad Reality owns an extron inline 3502 switch and wants to know how the sync works with this. So I have never used that specific switch or the 3505, but I'll give the basic rundown on what you need to worry about. Now, on the input side, I owned a switch, I believe the brand was ATEN, A-T-E-N, years ago, that I converted the SCART cables I was using, which at the time were just junky ones. I cut off the SCART ends and then wired it into a VGA style connector. It wasn't a VGA converted signal, just that D-sub connector. And I was able to use the ATEN switch, but it required TTL level voltage. You couldn't use C-Sync on that because the voltage was too low. And even though it was technically a manual switch, nothing would work if you didn't have the right level sync on there. The good news is, though, if the sync level's too low, it won't do any damage. It just won't work. So I'd give it a try and see. Get yourself or make yourself a passive SCART to VGA cable. Those things are handy, so if you take the time to make one, you'll probably use it again in the future and see if it works. And if it doesn't, you're not hurting anything. Now, on the output side of things, that's where it gets a little trickier. I'm not really sure if it'll change the sync, but I do know that extron crosspoints do, at least the ones I've tested, always output TTL level sync, which means that you should have a resistor in the BNC to SCART connector to make sure that the sync voltage isn't too high. Now, a bunch of people have tested a bunch of different crosspoints on their scopes, and I think it was a 680 ohm resistor or a 450 or something, but it was, around 500 millivolts is what they were aiming for the sync voltage under load. And if you don't know about any of that, please refer back to the scope video I did with Steve. So everybody kind of said, all right, out of the tons of switches we've tested, this is definitely a safe resistor to use. You could try that on the output side of yours, but I would personally prefer to use a scope to double check. If you wanted to try it, you could put the same level resistor in and get a VGA to SCART cable to have the resistor on the sync line of the SCART cable and give it a try. The good news is if that switch was outputting regular 75 ohm voltage, then nothing would happen. You wouldn't get any picture, but it's not going to harm anything. The bad news is you're rolling the dice on what level voltage that sync is on the output side. You should be fine, but I don't know if I would be comfortable giving that advice to say, throw in a resistor and try it and hope your OSSC survives. So yeah, that's kind of a tough one without an oscilloscope, but I don't know. Maybe see if somebody else owns a 3502 or a 3505 with a scope and see if they'd be willing to double check. Or I guess also check service manuals of those things. Maybe they list the voltage that it outputs on, but that's going to be kind of up to your own discretion if you'd want to give it a try. One quick addendum to that last question, totally forgot to add this. You only need to worry about sync on the output side if you're going into SCART equipment. If you're taking that VGA switch and going into monitors, especially if you're just talking about 480p RGB HV going into a VGA monitor, you should be fine just plugging it in. I mean, double check the service manual and everything, but every Sony PVM that I've owned that I've checked can safely accept TTL and 75 ohm, so you just wouldn't have to worry about anything at all. It's only if you're going into SCART equipment like switches, the OSSC, RetroTink products that you don't want to be sending TTL. So just wanted to make sure I threw that in there. Jason D had some Rad2X questions. Is there a pre-order for the next Rad2X batch? Not that I know of. If not, will there be a US seller or only retro gaming cables in the UK? I believe Rob's just selling them directly from his store. Maybe someday he'll possibly send something to Amazon to resell. But don't forget that the goal of those Rad2Xs were to be as cheap as possible without putting Rob out of business, of course. So, you know, anytime he would go through, even sending a big batch over to Amazon and letting them deal with it, they have to take their cut. He's going to deal with Amazon returns, which are a nightmare. So the price might have to go up as a result. And it's my personal opinion that if that was the choice, I would say no. Let me just keep selling them myself, especially because the prices aren't too bad now. But if you start jacking those up, you know, all these little extra things, it would kind of price it out of most people's price range. And lastly, do you know when the next batch will arrive approximately? No, but I, on a regular basis, bust Rob's chops about that because I gave mine away and I still don't have any Rad2X cables for myself to use. So I bug him on a regular basis, and if I hear anything, I'll make sure to update everybody. Bad Reality wants to know why I didn't include Bubba's response video to my SCART switch shootout in the weekly roundup. I did. I talked about it. It's embedded in the page too. Also, so the suggestion is I should make a SCART switch playlist with his response video, your SCART switch shootout video, and the Otaku SCART switch video, and any other kind of stuff like that. So that's an excellent suggestion. And all the time I get wonderful suggestions like that from people on how to improve the channel, how to do all these little things, how to add the right tags. But at the moment, respectfully, I am out of time. I barely even play guitar anymore, and I love playing guitar so much. So I would love to do all that stuff. I guess I need like a social media manager or something to step in and do all that stuff for me. If I'm ever like, I don't know, bored somewhere and just have a laptop but no equipment to do anything else, maybe I'll sit there and do all of that stuff. I did love the Bubba response. I have a routine where I wake up every morning and, the first thing I do while I'm still half asleep is check social media and comments because YouTube forces people to check and respond to comments or you don't get picked up in the algorithm. So every morning I sit down and just get trolled by a bunch of people with nothing better to do than shit on other people's videos. And I woke up and I saw something from Phone Dork, and I love Phone Dork. I think he's awesome. His videos kind of, inspired me a little bit to get into YouTube at all. So I saw something from him on Twitter, and I went, oh man, like, I hope I didn't do anything wrong. I hope Phone Dork isn't pissed at me. And I turned on that video. I was laughing so hard. My wife came out and was like, what is going on right now? Like, I was in tears. I felt like it was my birthday and I got a present. I was so ready to just click on stuff and be like, all right, what major mistake did I make in the SCART switch video that's this week's scandal that I have to deal with? And that's the response I got instead. Holy crap, that was awesome. That was super nice of him to do. He was totally correct in the video as well. The reason I didn't include that information in the main SCART switch shootout video is because they don't make those anymore. So I wanted to keep the information relevant. And also for 480p and under, that's totally cool. But once you start getting into 720p, the original G-SCART switch with the VGA output wasn't really designed to handle HD signals. So there's some extra stuff in there, but I certainly wasn't going to nitpick. I just loved the fact that I got a Phone Dork video. I think that was the coolest thing ever. So I guess, that's a little bit of the backstory on all that stuff. And you're totally right about the playlists. I will try to get around to it as soon as I can. Focus just picked up an LVP X300 projector, and it has a VGA input. And they wanted to know if I knew of a device to downscale an HDMI signal to VGA. So here's where things get a little bit complicated. You got to first, of course, find out what the maximum resolution of the projector is. And then you would have to set whatever your device is to that resolution. Now, it sounds like, based on your question, that you're trying to scale something that's only 1080p down to a lower resolution. So even if the projector takes 720p or 1024 by 768 or 1280 or whatever else, you still would need to change that image. And that's when you need some kind of higher-end video processor. You could find them used for cheaper, but I think a DVDO VP50 might be able to do that. I need to play with mine for a bunch of reasons. I think some of the Choreo TV1s might be able to do it, but they're all fairly expensive solutions. The easiest thing to do would just be figure out what resolution the projector accepts, and then go on the Amazon store that I have linked and get yourself an HDMI to VGA converter for super cheap, $10, and that's it. You're done. So hopefully you'll be able to figure that out based on the model of the projector, but if it is something like 480p and you got to go down from 1080p, that's going to be a little tricky, and you're probably going to spend more money on the scaler than you would finding a used projector. So, I guess check the resolution and kind of follow up from there, and maybe we could figure something out. Or, of course, if you had another use for one of these video processors, then cool, that's fine too. But I think that's where you should at least start. Rick says, I hate your theme song. It's too good and too catchy and sticks in my head all day. Not a Q&A, just wanted to give a shout out to whoever made that. Thank you very, very much. That when I first met the person that I was writing the songs with in the last band, we were actually in a different band together. It was pretty funny because the guitarist in that band said, hey, we have a new singer coming in. And I went, oh, not another. We had so many terrible singers that were just mean to people that couldn't even sing that well. I was like, why don't you just sing? It's metal, scream through it, who cares? And the singer came in and ended up becoming a pretty good friend of mine. And they sent me a couple songs one day, and I clicked on one of them, and it was just the 4 chords of that song, nothing else, with a vocal line on it. I think just played on an acoustic guitar. And the moment I heard the vocal line and the moment I heard those 4 chords, this had never happened to me before, but I just heard that, and I figured out where it was on the guitar, and I started playing it, and then I wrote the song as you hear it, start to finish, pretty much. I kind of came back and added that middle part because I wasn't quite good enough to play that super fast part in the middle, and it was just one of the coolest experience I've ever had. I've read about musicians that I follow having that happen to them, and it had never happened in my entire life, and it's happened a few times since with a few different people, but it was just such an amazing experience. And there was a very long and boring story that I'll tell other places someday about what happened with the album and the song and all that other stuff. But that is still probably my favorite song I've ever written. It's at least in the top 5. We did a stupid music video for it and everything else. And I am getting back into doing guitar stuff. I feel like the best way to force myself back into it and make time is by doing some kind of videos. I don't know what to do with that. A good friend of mine has a music channel. I might just do videos and give it to him to put on his channel, just because it's already got a decent following, and he's way better than me, so I think he might actually appreciate like a rhythm guitarist's approach on things. I opened up a personal channel, which I have precisely 0 videos on so far. I might throw them up on there, and I might move the Q&As there too. So actually, this kind of started to get off topic here, and I'll make this quick, but if anybody has any thoughts on this, I think the Q&As being all the thumbnails are the same. They don't get as many views as everything else. I actually think it might be good for the whole RetroRGB channel's algorithm if I moved all of those over to a personal channel. So maybe that's the solution. Maybe I just have my personal channel and I put up guitar videos, the Q&As, and then any other silliness that, just if I'm getting drunk with a friend and want to flip on a camera and hit record and talk, stuff that has nothing to do with retro gaming. And maybe you'd enjoy hearing, or maybe you don't care at all, so you just kind of ignore that channel. Is that the right thing to do? I make videos, but I'm not a YouTuber, if you will. I run RetroRGB and I like making videos, but I'm not into that whole scene. So is that the right way to handle that? Hopefully somebody listening would be able to chime in and let me know. I'd really appreciate it. But way off topic there. Thank you very much for the compliment, Rick. And I guess message me if you want. I could send you the album. Andrew C. said, back in April, I posted an article about metal Virtual Boy replacement medallions, but there was no source given and they seem to have sold out pretty much immediately. I'm still interested in replacing my brittle plastic one and would much rather have a nice metal one than the 3D printed ones I've seen around the internet. Great news for you, Andrew. The person who is making those, we email on a semi-regular basis. They're making another batch, and I think they're going to try to both make the black and the silver. So stay tuned. The moment they're available, I'll make sure to talk about them. To be honest, I don't think anybody anticipated the demand for them. I thought, my personal opinion was it was one of those things where if you saw it in person, you would want one. But I wasn't sure if the post and what I talked about in the weekly roundup was good enough to convey how much I liked it. Apparently it was, because people totally got it. But I gushed over that thing and I meant it. It's such a weird little upgrade because it's such a small detail, but I really like it. And the only other trick, because it's metal, you can't tighten it down all the way. You have to tighten it down and then back it out like a half a turn just to allow for the legs to be able to move. Or you could lock them in place, of course. But overall, I would never go back to the plastic one now. It's sturdy. It looks cool. The only problem is I don't know what I think looks better, the silver or the black with silver lettering. I like them both. So I got one of each, and I every time I grab Virtual Boy stuff, I always grab two. I have two friends that are really into Virtual Boy as well. I always grab two more. And, I kind of just grabbed a whole bunch and said, hey, everybody pick what you want. And I ended up with the black one because, I wanted the decision made for me. And it looks awesome. So I don't know. I don't know which advice on what color to get. But if you're a Virtual Boy fan, that's a simple but awesome upgrade. It's a Serial Wow wants to know what devices, if any, can offer on-the-fly resizing and recentering for 240p and 480i on a CRT or PVM and BVM. They get frustrated with constantly having to tweak settings in the service menus of the CRT or PVM when switching between consoles. In the recent SCART switch review, I mentioned the SCA 101 having horizontal and vertical centering, and some of the Extron devices offer similar controls, although I think only remember being able to adjust the horizontal size on certain units. Resizing and centering was only a minor annoyance when switching between consoles, but now that they've picked up a Supergun and a few arcade boards, it's more of an issue. So that's an interesting question. The new Switch is definitely the best choice if you're just looking for centering controls, but I don't know of anything that could stretch. There might be an extron interface that would allow you to do that, but that's almost more of a zoom thing. That's almost something like you would need a DVDO processor to do that. The one thing you can do is you could go into your service menu and take something like take the two contrast of the widest and narrowest image, and you could stretch it so that it's way too much for the wide one, but perfect for the narrow one, and then press the underscan button to toggle between them. So by doing that, you're essentially, stretching it past the tube, so there's nothing that's going to be drawn on those sides. You're cutting it off. But then by pressing the underscan button, now you have the smaller one. It's not as precise as like dialing in custom timings for each or anything like that. And one thing you could try that I've never tried before, so this might be a stupid idea, but you could try putting all the consoles through an OSSC into direct mode, pass-through mode, and seeing if you could manipulate the signal that way. So you would still have to go through profiles. Of course, you would then need like an HDMI to component converter on the output side, but maybe try it. If the OSSC thing works, please let me know, because that would be cool. I don't think it will, but hey, what the heck. But try the overscan thing first, because that might be a neat little workaround where you could just have an easy, think of it as a zoom button then. But I don't know, that's a tricky one. Juan Rodriguez says they recently took the time to unpack and hook up most of their old consoles to a consumer CRT. And of course, it's led to a shortage of inputs. They have a Sony Trinitron from 1998 that has one component and 3 composite or S-video inputs. You checked out the section on the extron crosspoints, but only RGB models are mentioned. Are there any you would recommend that use component video or even a mix? And also ones that do audio. So most of those extron crosspoints will do component video. You just need to have RCA to BNC connectors. A quick aside on those, if you're using a scope, buy the really good ones that are like $2.50 each, because it could affect the readings. But in a situation like this, buy a bag of 50, and if you have a problem with one, throw it out and grab another one, because you can get a bag of them for super cheap, of the mediocre quality ones. But that would be it. You could run everything through that. And I think, please double check the manual, but I think some of them could even pass composite in S-Video. You would just need to buy converters that split the S-Video signal to Y and C, B and C connectors. So that's certainly one option. Another would be the newer G-Comp switch. So you would have a tricky time with S-Video, though, because you would have to, it would pass composite and component video, no problem at all. But then you would also have to find a way to pass S-Video. So maybe you would have to get a same thing, like a splitter that goes from S-Video to 2 RCA connectors, and try using the 2 color channels. I've never tried that before. I don't even know if that would work, to be honest. But a G-Comp switch would certainly work for both of the other ones. Or you could just have multiple switches if you wanted. You know, you could have a G-Comp for component, and then you could go pick yourself up. You know, I would go with like a cheap push button switch for composite and S-Video. And, you know, some of those aren't going to be the best quality. You can find them cheap, so maybe find a couple of them on eBay for a few dollars and see if it really changes the video quality. One thing you could do that's really easy is prop your phone up, or, you know, if you have any way to, or I guess if you have a camera and a tripod, set it to manual mode, set everything the way, you know, get everything tweaked nice. Take a picture of the console plugged directly into the TV, then plug it in through the switch, take a picture of that, and then put them next to each other on your computer screen and do your own comparison test to see if it drops the quality. I used to do that all the time before RetroRGB, just to make sure the stuff I was using wasn't messing anything up. So, I mean, that's always kind of a good way about it. I mean, I do really like the look of composite video on CRTs. I just, so I wouldn't want to hurt that with a bad switch. But it is still composite video, so if you drop quality like 1%, that should be good enough too. But all, you know, good questions, but I guess it's just a matter of, do you want everything run through one switch? Are you okay with multiple switches? Because you would have to change the inputs of the TV anyway. So I would kind of step back and take a look at your whole setup and see what fits yours the best. Doomleg wants to know if I have any thoughts on Lotharex Hydra SCART switches. So I tested some of the original ones, and they had some problems, and one of them really freaked me out. With the switch and the BVM still on, but none of the consoles on, I was getting crazy stuff all over the screen, which really freaked me out, because I'm like, what voltage is being sent to my, you know, my rare BVM that I love because of this switch? No other switch I used ever did that. So I kind of stepped back from those. I've heard a few other problems with them over the years, but I've also heard that the latest revisions are much more improved and work a lot better. And a lot of people like the idea of having the 16-port one. So I don't really know if I have anything I could add that's useful to that question. I apologize. I would only just say don't pick up one of the older ones. And if you're going to get a newer one, you know, maybe try to do some of the tests that I did to see how it affects the image. I know I have a lot of equipment that your average person probably wouldn't have, but hey, maybe you have nerd friends that have a scope and have a bunch of other, like a good capture card and all this other stuff. So sorry, I can't add a little more to that, but I've always kind of shied away from the Hydra switches after that, because that just kind of freaked me out. You know, in contrast, right, the Taxon tool switch, I had a bunch of nitpicky things that I was worried about with it, but if you leave that thing in auto mode, you plug in all your consoles, I don't think there's ever going to be a problem. I wouldn't worry about using that. I could be wrong, of course. I've been wrong in the past, but, you know, I certainly wouldn't say like, ugh, I don't know about that. Whereas some of the issues I saw with the Hydra, I definitely would stay away from it. So hopefully that's a good comparison. But hey, maybe they're awesome now. I really don't know. But maybe if you know somebody that has one, see if you could test it. Matthew Underwood wants to know if there are any practical solutions for CRT whine. They can't hear it, but their wife can, and she hates it. I took her to a bunch of CRT TVs around the area, but we couldn't find a single one that didn't whine. Assuming she's not making up stories to keep me from bringing another TV in the house, I'd love to find a creative solution that's within my technical capabilities, if such a thing exists. So there's two types of noises that you're going to hear from CRTs. One is just the 15 kilohertz frequency of 240p and 480i, and that's never going away. You could try to do something like get a get a VGA monitor and run everything in 480p with scan lines, and you'll have a look that's the same, but the frequency will be higher, so it might be out of the hearing range. Check out that video soon. It could also be that, it's an old CRT that's making a lot more noise than another one. But if you said you took her around to a bunch of CRTs around the area and they all sounded the same, it sounds like her ears are just sensitive to that 15 kilohertz signal. And it's funny because I think maybe because I grew up with CRTs, I don't hear it, or I don't notice it anymore. But my ears are really sensitive to certain frequencies. And even, I'm sorry I've told the story before, but even when we were mixing the album a few years ago, I kept arguing with the producer, like, hey, there's this weird noise. It's like a crunch or a fuzz thing. I don't know how to explain it, but it's giving me a headache and it's in all the mixes. And he was older. And so when you get older, your hearing you start to lose the range of frequency, and he couldn't hear it at all. And it was super frustrating because it's exactly like saying, hey, watch out for that monkey that's right there. And, the other person's going, there's no monkey in the room. You're crazy. I mean, it's equally as insane as that, because I could hear it and he couldn't, and I didn't know that I was hearing frequency. And it took months until after the album was done for me to realize, and it actually took somebody else to mix the album before I realized that's what I was hearing. I had to go over a buddy's house and he was playing me a mix of one of his new songs, and I went, all right, we got to get to the bottom of this because I hear it here too. And that's when he went, oh, I have an idea. And he put on one of those hearing tests and cranked up the speakers. And he was like, raise your hand and then put your hand down when you could stop hearing the frequency. And, it's a really annoying tone that goes from low to high. And all of a sudden he puts his hand down and I'm like, no, I can still hear it. It's giving me a freaking headache. Could still hear it. And I had a much wider range of frequency of hearing. So if your wife can hear it, there's nothing you could do about it. I would try to maybe do 480p and check out that video soon that explains all of it. Or just, I don't know, put it in a different room. Another one from Matthew Underwood. They went ahead and bought an extron Crosspoint matrix switch, and it ended up costing like $45, which seems ridiculously low. Yeah, it's a good price. They're really thrilled with the quality, but here's the question. Since I'm running everything composite and this thing supports up to RGB HV, it has way more video inputs for each channel than I need. Instead of running audio through the Phoenix jacks, I just plugged my left and right RCA audio into video jacks in each channel, and it passed right through, no problem. There's nothing about this in the manual that I could find, and I even called Extron support and talked to a technician, but they weren't really any help because they said it's a retired model. Do you think this could be bad for any reason? So it's funny you say that, because somebody, I think even on these Q&As a few years ago, said that they tried the same thing and it didn't work. So as far as any danger, if it's changing the voltage of the signal going through, you could be sending higher voltage audio through. Check out the video I did with the help of Steve on the oscilloscopes and how to measure audio and stuff like that. And if you have a scope, heck, measure it and see. So that could be an issue. If it, I certainly wouldn't run it through the sync line, but other than that, I don't know. If it's not changing the voltage and it's not ruining the quality of the audio, there wouldn't be a problem. But depending, you already got this thing for $45, which is really cheap. So maybe check out OSH Park and order a bunch of those boards for the Phoenix jacks, and then just buy your own stuff and solder your own boards together. I think that's actually a pretty great project if somebody's looking to start out modding. I think the parts for that's cheap enough where if you messed up one or two, it's fine. So if you wanted to be safe, use the Phoenix connectors. If not, or if you're running audio into a pair of cheap desktop speakers or something that you don't care if it dies, what the heck? I hate to waste money and I hate to waste stuff, but I have a pile of speakers that I got, 5 sets for $10 at a Goodwill a few years ago. And if those lasted a year and then died because I was sending too much voltage, I hate to be wasteful, but I wouldn't care at all. However, if you're going into good equipment, if you're going into any expensive scalers or a stereo, I would be a little bit more leery, but it's kind of going to have to be your decision on that one. But I'm just still surprised that worked at all. Samson Wick said since the HD Retrovision AES adapters are sold out, they'd like to make their own because the connectors are off-the-shelf parts. It should be trivial to map the AES output to the Genesis 2 pins, but the thing I'm not sure about is whether or not the original adapter included any additional components to condition the AES signal at all. Has this been published anywhere, or do you know? I don't remember. If you know anybody with one of these adapters, you could try to have them pin out each one with a multimeter and see if there's a resistor on there. But if there's a capacitor in there or something, I don't know. I honestly don't really know how those things are made at all, and I've only used it once to test. But I've been since changing the outputs. At first I've switched over to using MVSs and superguns, and then I have it set to a Genesis 2 output, so it works perfectly with the HD Retrovisions and the Rad2X, actually. So I'm not really sure the best way to go about that on the AES. Depending on if you enjoy making a project like this, you might actually be better off just getting something like RetroTink transcoder and use your existing RGB cable if you have one. Just kind of throwing ideas out there, but I'm not really sure. I think the best way would be to try to find an existing one and see if you could figure out if there's any resistance on the lines and kind of step it up from there. Sean Henderson chimed in with some information on the extron Crosspoint switches, and now I kind of wish I read from oldest to newest instead of newest to oldest, because this probably would have helped with some of the other questions. But there are different models of the extron Crosspoint switches, and Sean checked out the manual for the 300 series, and it looks like all of them can pass RGBS, RGBHV, component video, S-video, and composite video signals. I don't know if there are models that won't do one or the other or something like that, but that's good to know. I still am looking for another 32 by 32. I think I had one, or maybe I had a 24. I had one of the giant ones years ago, and I ended up having to sell it when I moved, and I really regret that, because if I ever build myself like a retro installation again, I would love to have a big matrix switch like that with everything plugged in where you just press some buttons. Definitely not realistic, both in the apartment that I'm in now and because of the fact that I'm constantly swapping consoles out to work on them. But if I ever get settled in a place, I would love to have something like that. So, hey, anybody with a Crosspoint 300, 32 by 32, or even a 32 by 8, want to sell me one, let me know. Gord Captain had a pretty interesting question, and I'm going to try to the best of my ability to answer it, but I think you might need to do some more following up on this one. But the summary is they have a Sega Saturn with a bad power supply, and they tried recapping it, or I guess they had a good modder recap it, and it still didn't work. So then they tried to replace some other components on the power supply, and it still didn't work. So they just said, all right, I got to get a replacement. They picked up something called a Saturn PSU-I or -1 off of eBay. And now they want to make sure that, after all the work they've put into their Saturn, is this going to be okay? Is this a shoddy aftermarket PSU? Is it good? Is it going to lower the life of the console? And the one thing I could definitely say for sure is that whatever AC to DC power supply you're using has got to be high quality, because you say that the one you got has a 12 volt 2 amp barrel plug power supply hookup. So that means you would have to have a wall wart on the other side, and then this power supply just becomes a DC to DC converter. So you need to start with a good AC to DC converter, because without one, you're definitely going to do damage at some point. It might not kill your console, but it's not good for it. I love the Triad ones that Firebrand X has been linking to. They've passed every test I've thrown at them. So far, at least at the time that I'm recording this, they're still good. You can never tell if a company's going to have to change their design, and sometimes they have to change their design because of regulations and stuff, but at least as of right now, the Triad seem to be great. So I would just go on to check out Firebrand X's site. He links to the Shmups forum post, and I would find like one of the 3.5 amp ones. Just make sure that you got to match center positive or center negative. Make sure that you match that to the internal PSU that you got. And also, I would always go higher on the amp side, because let's just say hypothetically the Saturn draws between 1 and 1.5 amps. I don't know what it draws. I'm just making up some numbers here, but hypothetically, let's say sometimes it's 1, never really goes over 1.5. You don't want you definitely don't want a 1 amp power supply, and you probably wouldn't want a 1.5 because efficiencies, heat, a bunch of different things could affect that. So you would at least want a 2 amp, but you could put a 3 amp, a 10 amp, a million amp. It doesn't really matter. All that Saturn is going to pull out of that is what it needs. So don't think of it as sending high amperage in. Just think of the amps sitting there, and then the internal PSU only pulls what it needs. So having a quality, clean power supply that's more amps than you need is definitely step number one. And if you do that and it looks good and it sounds good and there's no interference, I would just do a little bit more research on exactly what that is. Maybe somebody listening could chime in the comments. I know I'm not really active in the YouTube comments of these, but other people are, and maybe they have them and have already tested them. That would be super helpful. So other than that, really good quality wall wart, and then just do a little more research to make sure that there isn't any issues, and you could always post pictures on social media. Then you have to, deal with being on social media, but you could always see who else has had one, post good pictures of the internal power supply. Maybe somebody could recognize like, oh, those are quality components, or, oh no, it's going to catch fire. Just kidding. But, so it's a great question, but the only thing that I could confidently answer, and that is get a good wall wart. As far as the rest of it goes, I can't really comment on it without having people that I trust who are really good at power stuff take a look at it and see what they think. But as long as you have a good wall wart, that's definitely a giant step in the right direction. Well, that's it for this week. If you're new to the Q&As, just make sure to post whatever question you have wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. The way these things work, I can't really go back and sort through other older posts. And if I ever miss your question, it's either because it came in after I started shooting them or because I messed up in post and deleted a file. So sorry about that. But as always, thank you all so much for participating and so much for your support. You all keep these crazy videos and all the research going. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. It's 1,000,000 degrees in here, so I'm going to go have a cold beer and cool off. Take care, and I'll see you next week.